It's the dependency relationships that you want to overcome, and you need an alternative to not only to the use of the dollar itself, but to the dollarized financial system that was designed to support the dollar in 1945 for it. So yes, they have to realize that behind the dollar as a means of payment is the whole dollar's institutional system. Certainly, now that the Americans under Trump are blocking trade with the United States, that gives a whole opening for China to expand its export markets, not simply to replace what the United States is doing, but with third countries to export more to them that they're not getting from the United States, and essentially reorganize trade that there will be a mutual balance, and the rest of the world, certainly East Asia, can be self-sufficient without trade with the United States. Many factories and Chinese people will have a new kind of job, or at least producing a different kind of products for this new organization of trade and finance. But of course, it can be done, and I think that's what the BRICS countries are talking about. How can they reorganize trade among themselves so they don't need to trade with the United States? And if they don't need to trade with the United States, then they don't need to hold dollars anymore. And they don't need to keep their gold in the vaults of the New York Federal Reserve Bank and the Bank of England and the Bank of France. They can take the gold back for themselves. There must be technicians to get together and led by business organizations to say, here's how we can create a reorganization of trade, leaving the Americans and the Europeans out in the cold. We're obviously focusing on Trump and the Americans, but Europe is a American satellite. And you have to realize that splitting from the United States means splitting from Europe, who is just as even more viciously racist against China as the United States is, as you can see from its behavior just toward the Slavic people. The statement by the Europeans that the Slavs are the Russians are subhuman, a different race. And if the racism is even among white people and Indo-European speakers, even of West European against Russia, imagine what their racism is towards China. This is a real antagonism that you have to realize just dismiss Europe as well. And the result may be that Europe ends up breaking away from the United States, along with many of the global South countries. That'll take 20 years or so for essentially what the European population wants, to have a kind of political revolution to break up the Eurozone, to break up the European community and replace this American military NATO government over Europe with a non-military, more democratic government than you have today. So we're dealing with actually a triangular kind of relationship. The world majority, 85%, the United States, and then Western Europe trying to rejoin civilization. It's important to realize that the Bancor wasn't a world currency for general trade. It was the Bancor was only for international payments among governments to settle the balance of payments, surpluses, and deficits among governments, so that you could prevent any chronic surplus countries like the United States was expected to be. And if they're chronic debtors, that are unable to pay their debts. You wipe out the debts of countries that can only pay the debts by sacrificing their own economic growth. So the Bancor really was addressing the problem of international debt among governments. Intergovernmental debt, not general trade, but that really is, in a way, that should be the easiest problem to solve because there was so much discussion of it already in the 1944. This is what I discuss in my book, Superimperialism. This was basically the big fight that occurred in creating the Bretton Woods institution. And it was created in a way that benefits the United States. And the alternatives were already seen in a way that was much more free. You don't want any group, any country, or any group of countries to be chronically in debt as a result of trade patterns that force them into trade deficit, that force them to borrow from the creditor countries, that combine trade dependency with international debt dependency and financial dependency. It's the dependency relationships that you want to overcome, and you need an alternative to not only to the use of the dollar itself, but to the dollarized financial system that was designed to support the dollar in 1945 for it. So yes, they have to realize that behind the dollar as a means of payment is the whole dollar's institutional system. That has to be discussed. Well, the great advantage China has is that it does not have a domestic financial oligarchy. It has many wealthy families and even billionaires who've gotten rich through industry or through real estate, but not a financial banking sector that makes money financially instead of industrially. The American financial sector and banks are based on essentially making money by increasing stock market prices. And this is by stock buybacks, buying their own stock, taking over other countries by companies by borrowing money and buying them on credit, or by paying higher dividends, not by investing in long-term research and development. China doesn't have that mentality. China has an industrial mentality, and it's used its economic surplus to actually invest in tangible means of production and raising living standards and public infrastructure spending. Whereas the infrastructure from the United States to Europe is falling apart. The bridges, the transportation, the railroads, they're all falling apart. So China doesn't have that mentality. Well, one of the things that the American Treasury Secretary was trying to get from China was saying, let American banks come into China. We're willing to reduce the trade barriers to China if you let the banks come in. We can create dollar credit. We can begin buying Chinese companies. And if we can buy control of Chinese companies, then we have no objection to China replacing American exports made by American labor as long as our financial sector can gain. Well, I don't think China has any intention of letting the American bankers come in and begin to financialize China's economy. So as the discussions are occurring, what kind of world economic system do we want to create? It's not going to be a financialized system. It will be a very materialistic system based on trade, tangible capital investment, employment, raising living standards, infrastructure, as in the Belt and Road Initiative, all of these. It's as if China's plans are designed by industrial engineers, not by financial appropriation. So I think if they just follow the natural industrial plans for, how do we work out the trade and all of this, and once they figure out what a plausible pattern of trade and payments would be, how do they create institutions to regulate and keep this trade within some kind of overall economic and financial balance? So I think that the starting point of China is much more logical than the starting point that you would get from any Western institution that's financial instead of industrial. We're dealing with the conflict between Western finance capitalism and China's industrial socialism, industrial capitalism, industrial socialism. They're really the same thing because in the 19th century, the deal was to evolve into a mixed public-private economy that was socialist. So China's achieving the ideal that Europeans and Americans had in the late 19th century that the West no longer has, but China's picked up this same logic. And I think if it follows that, nature will take its course. I wish there were more of, I don't know how much history of economic thought and how much economic history of the West is taught in China. But if there is a history of economic thought, analyzing what were the classical economists all about that ended up with Marxism. Marx was the end of a long tradition. Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill, who called himself a socialist, and by Marx's day, everybody was a socialist of one kind or another. Well, that's what you have in China today, socialism with Chinese characteristics. And if they can simply apply the logic that they've done to their own economy with their own regional balance to the whole global majority, the logic should sort of follow its own momentum.